Hi, welcome to today's presentation, College and Career Readiness for Students on IEPs, How to Achieve Real-World Outcomes. I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Cheryl Junge, and I'm a retired special educator with 25 years experience in the field of transition education. Over the course of those 25 years, I worked as a work-based learning program coordinator, an 18 to 21-year-old program coordinator, a high school transition coordinator, and a classroom special education teacher. I also had the opportunity to do work under the Workforce Services Youth Counselor Program under the Job Training Partnership Act and the Workforce Investment Act programs. I've had the opportunity to work as adjunct faculty at both Casper College and Bemidji State University, teaching pre-service teachers on transition topics. Some of my experiences over the course of my career include serving as the lead for the Wyoming Transitions Outcomes Project, an early transition activity that was done with educators across the nation, as the chair of the Wyoming State Rehabilitation Council, and as a current member of the Wyoming Transition Team, as well as the Wyoming Association of Persons Supporting Employment First, or WYAPSE, where I had the opportunity to also serve as a board member. I'm currently working as a pre-employment transition services trainer. I offer services for students who are enrolled in school between the ages of 14 and 21, and I am a self-employed vendor under a grant that was written through the Wyoming Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. This grant provides me the opportunity to provide in-person services to eligible high school students in the Trona and Converse counties, as well as virtual services to eligible high school students throughout the state of Wyoming. My grant also affords me the opportunity to provide pre-employment transition service training to parents, schools, and community agency teams on topics around transition. Here's my goals for today's training. I hope to create an understanding of where we are today in terms of legislated expectations for students who have disabilities. I also want to create an understanding of the power of the secondary IEP process and the role it plays in transition planning and outcomes. I'd like to expand your thinking about transition and transition activities, as well as create an understanding of the changes in the legal protections and requirements that are going to occur as your student exits the public school program. Finally, I'd like to provide some education on the advantages and the importance of pre-employment transition services and working with vocational rehabilitation. Well, let's begin by finding out how we are doing. Research shows that students with disabilities struggle to succeed in college, careers, and are more likely to live in poverty than their peers. Well, that's not good news. The Bureau of Labor Statistics news release dated February 24th of 2021 provides us with some of the most current data for persons with a disability. This information shows that across all age groups, persons with disabilities were much less likely to be employed than those without disabilities. Across all educational attainment groups, unemployment rates for persons with a disability were higher than for those with no disabilities. In 2020, 29% of workers with a disability were employed part-time. That compares to 16% of those who had no disability. And finally, employed persons with a disability were more likely to be self-employed than those with no disability. Now, why are these statistics important? The biggest reason is because they show the gap between non-disabled peers and students with disabilities in terms of the outcomes that they receive through their educational programming or that process of transition. Well, let's take it down from the national viewpoint and look at just at how we're doing here in Wyoming. The federal government uses two different indicators to measure how well public schools are doing when it comes to students with disabilities and their post-school outcomes. One of those indicators, indicator 13, is used to measure the teacher's ability to meet the compliance factors that are laid out in the law. And I'll cover those in a little bit more detail in just a while. Indicator 14 measures how successful we are in helping students attain those outcomes that were reported as part of their IEP process. So these results are from the 2020-2021 school year and are the most recent data available. The way this process works is school districts contact all of their exiting students who received IEP services, and they ask them about their current status as far as post-secondary education, employment, and/or other forms of training. Those are the three areas that the law requires that we monitor in terms of successful outcomes. 500 youth were interviewed in the 2020-2021 school year. Out of those 500, 86 students had enrolled within 1 year of leaving high school into an institution of higher education. So that could include community colleges and/or university programs. That calculates to being 16.83% of all the youth enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving high school. The target that the state of Wyoming had set was the same target for individuals without disabilities, which is 19%. So unfortunately, Wyoming did not make the mark in having students participate in post-secondary education within 1 year of exiting high school. Now, indicator 14B takes that first group of students who have gone into post-secondary education training opportunities and adds to it all youth who have become competitively employed within 1 year of leaving high school. So out of those 500, 307 had actually entered into employment and/or college for 60.08% of our population entering one of those two areas. The target for Wyoming was 59%. So Wyoming actually scored a little bit higher than the target level in terms of having students engaged in higher level activities. Indicator 14C takes all the students that enroll in post-secondary education, plus the students that went to work, and adds any additional type of post-secondary education, training, or employment as part of the measurement. And what we find is that roughly 74.36%, or about 74% of our students, do go forward and enter into some kind of continuing education, training, or employment opportunity. The national average of students who are not disabled who participate in that same level of engagement is 73%. So we actually met and exceeded our target by about 1.5%. Now that all sounds great until you look at our statistics over the course of the last several years. So 2016-17 is as far back as we're looking for this particular measurement. You can see that we were only at 71% of our students being engaged. But in the 18-19 school year, we neared 79.02% of our students. And over the last 2 years have consistently fallen off about 5 percentage points. So we're heading in the wrong direction. So how can we improve the outcomes for our students? First of all, you need to recognize that you are also transitioning as a parent or a guardian. What you are going to be able to do, what you are going to be expected to do, and what you've done in the past are all going to be changing. It's important for you to know that transition is a process you want to start early. Those high school years evaporate very, very quickly. And we want to take full advantage of not only the resources available, but the funding available as well, while our students are part of the public school system. It's important for us to increase our understanding about what are the protections and rights that are embedded in the law, so we can understand what we have access to, and what we can expect to be protections for our students as they leave the public school setting. It's very important to maximize the educational resources that are available to you. And it's also very important to work in partnership with not only the school, but with the adult agencies that your child is likely to encounter in order to accomplish those desired goals. It's important to understand the roles and the responsibilities of the various support systems, as well as the limitations to those roles. And finally, we can improve things by using ongoing assessments to help us drive the process. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background and history, only because I want you to understand how very new to the educational system all of this is. And I also want you to understand how much it has gained in importance in terms of federal legislative practices. So in 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed for the first time, where it included some provision for transition services. So really, it was only about 30 years ago that we even started talking about the IEP process having an expected result in some transition outcomes. In 1992, the Rehabilitation Services Act was amended to include the same transition language as IDEA. The reason that's important is because the Rehabilitation Services Act, or RSA, is the overarching legislation that guides the functions of vocational rehabilitation. So in 1992, public school and vocational rehabilitation became merged in having the same goal for student learners. In 1994, the School to Work Opportunities Act required the inclusion of all students. So at this point in time, students were able to come into what had previously been career and technical education or vocational technical education opportunities that were limited to only students who did not have disabilities. Now that those services and programs are required to provide opportunities and access for all. In 1997, IDEA was reauthorized, and at that point in time, it started to include very specific language for transition practices and outcomes. So instead of just setting the expectation, it now gave very specific guidance to public schools about how they were to achieve that outcome. In 1998, the Workforce Investment Act was linked the RSA to generic employment services for all individuals. So previously, Workforce Investment Act money excluded students with IEPs and in some cases 504 needs, and was targeting a much different population. In 1998, the WIA program encompassed all students that had barriers to employment. And in 2014, the Workforce Investment Act was amended and became the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act. This outlined a required coordination of both workforce and public agency efforts for all individuals. And it started to require that 15% of all funds that went to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation would be expended on students in need of pre-employment transition services. So you can see that over the course of time, students with disabilities have become much more part of the conversation about having successful outcomes as a result of their public school education. And so much so that the dollars that have been set aside to serve adults with disabilities now said part of that money has to go into early intervention services. So the reason I cover all of that is because I want you to understand how all of these systems have been driven together legislatively. Over the course of the last 30 years, the federal government has increasingly said that students with disabilities not only have the opportunity to participate in educational services, but they have the right to expect that as a result of doing so, they will have adult outcomes similar to their non-disabled peers. Now, I told you I was going to explain a little bit more to you about the requirements that schools have to meet under IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This law drives the actions that any schools that receive federal funds have to follow when they're working with students with disabilities. You might ask, why would we even spend our time focusing on the IEP process? It's important because the IEP drives the educational plan for the student. It is a legally binding document and an agreement between the student, their family, and the school, as well as any other identified participating agencies, on just exactly what is going to happen. When focused, the IEP drives many opportunities for change and growth. And it's my opinion that in my history as a special education teacher, most of the time I have not seen families take full advantage of what this program has to offer them, oftentimes because they don't understand the expanse of what they can ask for as part of the process. The IEP can be a source of revenue and resources for your student when it's used correctly. Unfortunately, many IEPs focus on remediation of academic skills and not on preparing students for their future. But as a parent and a guardian, you have the right to expect both from your child's school. During the elementary and middle years, IDEA's focus is to develop communication, social, and academic skills, and provide maximum access to the general education curriculum and peer group. It's unfortunately often not used to introduce transition topics and to start that planning process, and it really should be. There's some ways that you can provide transition training in the elementary years, and this actually happens fairly often in the general ed curriculum, but unfortunately many students who have IEPs sometimes miss out on these opportunities because they're in special education service time or related service time, because these are seen as additional things to the curriculum and not part of the base. So it's important when your children are young to talk about expectations for future employment. Let them know that it is normal and it is typical for individuals who leave school to go into the workforce or to go into training to prepare for the workforce. It's important to provide opportunities to engage in general education as much as possible. Remember, we want to have the opportunity for our students to be exposed to and to learn from their general ed peers as much as possible, not only because of the benefits that you'll see educationally in the school system, but because of the benefits that you'll see as they leave the school system and go into the larger community. During the elementary years, we want to promote the development of skills, and we also want to have our students be involved in experimentation to identify those accommodations that provide the greatest access to their general education and peer group. We want to ensure that IEP students are included in activities and especially field trips to develop and become aware of future skill expectations. It's pretty typical for elementary classrooms to visit different kinds of businesses as part of a career study unit or a community unit. It's important to have classroom career speakers come in and talk about their jobs or ways that they contribute to the community. It's also important to provide opportunities within the classroom to have classroom job responsibilities or chores, just like their peers do. And it's important whenever possible for students to actually participate in their IEP process. Now, that participation should be an age-appropriate activity. I'm not expecting a kindergartner or first grader to come in and run an IEP meeting, but even a kindergartner can come in and speak to the parts that they like best about their school day or the things that they like to learn the most. That's giving them the opportunity to know that that meeting not only is about them, but it includes them and also gives the team the chance to begin to learn about the students' preferences and interests. Transition in the middle school years actually picks up a lot of traction. At this point in time, it is typical for students without disabilities to participate in career exploration activities. It's also pretty typical for those students to be involved in taking some kind of a career interest inventory. And as a matter of fact, oftentimes in the middle school years, students will participate in early academic testing as part of the ACT suite or SAT suite, in which they find out information about career potential, as well as academic skills and areas to be developed. Consider having your students become involved in the pre-employment transition services program at age 14. This is available because in Wyoming, while we don't always provide transition services at 14, we can provide transition services at 14, especially for students who are likely to need a greater level of support and assistance or a longer time to learn the number of things that we want to expose them to. We also want to keep in mind students who might be at risk of dropping out. We want to make sure to get them involved with these agencies and services well before they reach the age of 16, where they could choose to end their public school career. Some other things that students can do during the middle school years includes things like watching career videos to learn about different types of jobs, or take a learning styles inventory to have better awareness about the way that they learn best. They should be learning and practicing a variety of study strategies, and that's a typically taught thing in the elementary and middle school years. Students with disabilities need to engage in those activities just as their peers do. They need to learn and practice organizational skills. And it's also important for students to learn about their disability and the accommodations that they're using. During the course of my career, I frequently ran into parents who felt like they did not want their children to know that they had a disability because they feared the impact it might have on their self-esteem. In reality, students are going to have to be able to not only understand their disability, but understand the disability's impact on the things that they want to do in life. If they don't have the opportunity to talk about and practice that over an extended period of time and become comfortable with that, that's going to be a very challenging thing for them to be able to do. I encourage you strongly to have your students attend and, to the degree possible, participate in their IEP meetings. And I'd like to share with you something that was done in a training that I attended that I really kind of made a lot of sense to me. And they likened the IEP process to being like a birthday party. Imagine that when you are in the elementary grades, your parents throw you a birthday party, but they don't invite you to it. They invite a number of different people and they plan and they organize and they make plans for what's going to happen until your next birthday, but they just simply don't include you in the process. And then as you get older, they might want you to come to the birthday party, but they don't really want you to be involved in it. You're just expected to sit there and listen and kind of tolerate all these people talking about you at your party. But it's not really your party. It's much more their party. And then suddenly you get to high school age, and not only are you supposed to be attending the party, but you're supposed to know what's going on there. And you're supposed to be planning and knowing who to invite and telling them what theme you want your party to have. Well, you've had no experience to help you get to that point. So that's why it's important to attend and participate in IEP meetings. We really want students to understand not only their role in the process, but to recognize that this whole process exists because of them. It should be something in which they gain self-awareness, they gain confidence, and they gain support. And quite honestly, in my experience, IEP meetings where students are present and participating are much more pleasant for everybody involved, because they're not going to be simply a conversation about who they are on paper. It's going to be who they are as a person. Also consider developing skills for what I call community literacy. And that's having students out and about in the community, actively participating in the different places that they'll go, the different ways they'll get there, and the services that are available to them as a citizen of their community. When students get to the high school level or the secondary IEP, which is mandatory for teams to start to address during the IEP cycle where students turn 16, there's really a change in focus in terms of what the IEP is for. As defined by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, amendments of 1997 under Part A General Provisions, Section 60230, a coordinated set of activities for a student with a disability that is designed within an outcome-oriented process, which promotes movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational training, integrated employment, including supported employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. So you can see that the secondary IEP has a couple of different purposes. Number one, it's intended to be a coordinated set of activities. It's not a bunch of things happening in isolation just to ensure the receipt of a diploma for a student. It is much more focused on what the students' opportunities will be upon leaving public school and encompasses all aspects of their life. So I talked about indicator 13, and here are some of the requirements that IDEA requires of educators when providing transition services. As I said, the planning for transition must start no later than the IEP where the student turns 16. But keep in mind, it may start as early as 14 when a team deems that to be appropriate. Age-appropriate assessments are required to identify student preferences and interests for the future. And age appropriate is very important because we don't want to hold students on IEPs to a higher standard of ability, but we also don't want to discount or feel like they're incapable of participating in an adult world. We want to make sure that we are focusing on assessments that are going to give us age appropriate comparative information. Indicator 13 requires the identification and the promotion of post-secondary outcomes for students who are on IEPs. It requires a coordination of the providers and the inclusion of community members who are likely to provide or pay for future services to attain or support desired outcomes of the student. So it's important to think about who are all the agencies that are likely to be involved in the student's life and bringing them to the table early so that we are working together as a cohesive group. The statement of transition service needs focusing on the courses of study to include community activities, modified or specialized instruction, and related services relative to the post-school goals and adult outcomes. So in the secondary IEP, the focus is really much less about access to communication, social, and academic learning skills. It is much more about taking those skills and applying them into post-school goals and adult outcomes. And then what are the supports the team needs to bring to the table to help ensure that that gap between where the student's skills are today and where the student wants to be 1 year out of high school come together. The courses of study is much more than just the graduation plan. It should encompass and maximize the access to the general education curriculum that best suits that student's post-school goal outcomes. It's also required to provide evidence of how the courses and the IEP goals and objectives are related to those post-school outcomes. So many schools will make loose connections saying things like, well, if we're working on reading, you need to be able to read when you go to college. Or if we're working on math, you're going to have to be able to use math at the grocery store. There really is the opportunity to provide a much closer connection between what the student wants to do when they leave high school and what the student is going to be expected to learn as part of their high school program. Finally, indicator 13 requires that there is education for the student and the family about the changes in the roles and requirements as that student reaches the age of majority at 18. So part of the process is to help families and students understand how their roles change and how the legal protections under IDEA change. The Statement of Transition Services identifies the services that are to be provided to your student. It specifies the timelines as well as the persons who are responsible for the identified activities. It looks at the coordinating agencies and it includes the key contacts from those agencies. So you don't want to just throw out the name of an agency like vocational rehabilitation. It should also pull in a specific counselor who's going to be responsible for actually working with your child through the process. It identifies the intended outcomes of that secondary IEP, and it establishes a system of monitoring both the activities and the education that is going to be followed up on. IDEA requires the identification of students' post-school vision. So we are, as a school team, are required to understand where the student wants to go for post-secondary education and training upon exiting high school, and where they plan to go in the direction of employment upon exiting high school. But the IEP team must also consider, how is the student doing in acquiring independent living skills and being exposed and developing those skills as well. They also provide for the opportunity for a functional vocational assessment. And that means for the student to actually engage in hands-on kinds of activities to both measure and observe the kinds of skills and development that they are going to need to meet their post-school goals. Transition planning really is about much, much more than just academics. And it's more than just coming up with the name of a career that they're interested in or whether or not they would like to go to college. It includes finding out what they want to be employed as or what career they want to pursue. What are their communication skills and where do we need to support those communication skills? What do they want to do for recreation and leisure? Have they been exposed to the organizations that offer that? And have they developed the skills to be able to participate successfully? Do they know how to be self-determined? And I wanted to tell you a little bit about something from my own teaching history. One of the things that I started doing years ago when I was in the classroom working in middle school was I would give students an assessment that measured their comfort in controlling their own life. And I gave them specifically a tool called the Nowicki-Strickland locus of control. What this tool measures is how students perceive, how much power students perceive they have in actually driving their own future. Many students perceived that they were simply the victims of circumstance or luck. Some students perceived that it didn't make any difference what they did because it was what their parents wanted, not what they wanted that counted. And some students felt like they perhaps did have control in certain aspects of their life, but not in other aspects. One of the things I discovered through my informal research practice was that about 75% of the students I encountered who were on IEPs, regardless of their level of disability impact, oftentimes did not perceive themselves to have any control over their future. Well, imagine how that ends up manifesting itself if you are a student in the classroom, or if you are a student attending an IEP meeting. When your team is asking you, what do you want to be when you leave school? And what kind of job do you want to have? And do you want to go to college? A student who doesn't have a strong sense of internal locus of control doesn't really see that what they want matters at all. So they may come up with any choice, whether it's something that they feel there's actually a reality about or not is not important, because ultimately it's going to be the decision of what the school wants them to do or what the teacher wants them to do or what chance wants them to do, because after all, they have a disability and that was a luck of the draw. What I discovered is that if I had students that had that kind of a profile, it was much more difficult to engage them in a process of actually participating in their own future planning and being involved in activities that they felt had value and that they had the motivation to engage in. So for many of my students, I had to step back and start by helping them understand that they could develop a stronger internal locus of control, that they actually did have control over many things that were going to happen to them, and that by participating in the process, they could be far more successful in having other people listen to what they wanted in their own life. So self-determination and self-advocacy is a key component that oftentimes school teams overlook or completely dismiss. Again, we're going to look at post-secondary education and training. Do students even know what the options are? Many students assume you're going to get a job or you're going to go to college, and they don't know that there's other choices along the way that they could make. It looks at health. What's going to happen to that student who may have some health involved issues? Do they know how to manage their own healthcare needs? Do they know how to advocate for their own healthcare needs in the system? Do they have the skills they want to be able to live independently and function through daily living activities? How are they going to do with their interpersonal relationships at work, at school, at home, in a future family dynamic? And also, what level of involvement do they want to have in the community? Do they want to be active and involved? Do they know what the resources are that are out there? And do they know how to pursue their own interests? All of those different components fall into an effective transition plan and really should be something that the school team is helping students to work through and identify. So as I said, an effective transition plan will develop a pathway to all of the significant activities that the student wants to pursue as they grow and develop. So it's not just looking at things that are school related, like what's your favorite subject or how to make a friend or how to participate in a club or a sport activity, focusing on getting a diploma or maybe starting a part-time job. It also looks beyond that into the future of things like, what are your life goals? What do you want for quality in your life? How do you move from where you're starting out as an employee and get promoted and work your way up a career ladder? How much independence do you want to have, and how do you increase that level of independence? What kind of dynamic do you see in the future as far as marriage or family? All of those are things that the school touches on and has the opportunity to support students in the development of skills. Here's how I think I would like you to look at the idea of transition assessment. So transition assessment is a process whereby we find out information about the student. Career exploration is activities that the student engages in to find out about their interests and preferences. When those come through the funnel of age-appropriate transition assessments, we can identify the needs, the strengths, the preferences, and the interests of the student as required by law. Next, we can help the student review those results and make decisions about whether the choices that they've made for themselves demonstrate a good match. If they do, then we're going to move into how do we support you in moving in that direction. But if they don't, we're going to go back and do some more assessment and more exploration and find out about other options and begin the process again. Once we've identified a good match for the student and it's something that is realistic based on their skills, abilities, motivations, preferences, and interests, we can start writing those post-school outcome goal statements, looking at career and employment, post-secondary education and training, and independent living when it's appropriate for the school to be part of that process. We can write measurable annual goals and objectives and explore all the different possibilities through that process to help the students develop a successful plan, to look at their course of study of the classes they're going to be exposed to identify specific transition services that we want them to be connected to identify how our related services can best support that movement from being a student in school to being in the successful adult world they plan for. And also looking at what are the adult and community services that they're likely to need to support that process over the period of time. This is what effective transition assessment should do. So again, we're talking about age-appropriate transition assessments. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I truly feel that this is probably where we're missing the boat with many of our school services. We are not connecting information to decision-making in the way that we should. And the purpose of transition assessments, while it definitely helps the school team know what to do next, it's most important to help that student know what to do next. It's to increase their self-awareness about things they can do, things they can't do yet, but could with effort, and things that even with effort, they're not likely to attain. It also helps them identify what are the options and choices and opportunities that are before them. It helps students identify and give names to their preferences and interests. It provides a basis for that post-secondary vision that the student is asked to report on every year. It helps to identify the strengths, passions, and motivations for the student and connects us to pathways that might work for students who may be struggling. It identifies gaps in learning, experiences, or understanding that then drive specific activities on the part of the school to foster greater understanding, learning, and expertise. And finally, age-appropriate transition assessments need to be individualized. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And they need to be ongoing because as students grow, gain, and mature, we want to see where they are and where we need to go next. Transition assessments are not something that's just given once a year right before the IEP meeting to get everybody on the same page. They are not a one and done event. It is not something that is given and then we put it in the drawer. It is also not only about career interests or always a standardized test. And it's not intended to be a screening tool to identify problems. It's intended to be a screening tool to open doors and identify the need for further assessment. Transition assessments are something that's offered continuous throughout the secondary school years, and they're formal and informal in nature. So they can include things like standardized tests, but they may also include rating scales, student observations, curriculum-based measures, progress reports, interviews, self-reflections, and many, many other opportunities to gather information about where the student is compared to where they want to go. It's a source of information to identify post-secondary goals, and it's designed to inform the student and the school team of the status of the student compared to their desired outcomes. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? Where are the gaps that we need to address? The transition assessments are used to drive the next steps for students and staff by providing regular feedback and increasing awareness of both where the student is from the school perspective and where the student is from their own perspective. The information that's captured through assessment should be documented under the present levels of academic and functional performance on the IEP and should speak to all the areas of the student's life as it relates to their post-school vision. So you'll notice on the traditional state forms, it's even spelled right out for the team. You should include information about post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, and/or community participation. That is the framework in which our conversation should take place. But when that assessment comes out of context or the information is given in isolation, we typically see data-based grade levels compared to peers and not compared to where that individual wants to go. The focus is oftentimes on academic performance, even though functional performance is clearly required as well, related to grade equivalent expectations, not their post-school goals. It doesn't drive the next direction for services to help the individual pursue their post-secondary goals. It doesn't help identify the clear path to get there. And unfortunately, it may result in ineffective IEP planning. Now, I'm going to give you an example. This isn't necessarily a bad IEP. It meets all the requirements of the law, but it doesn't do a really good job of helping the student propel forward in terms of where they need to go. So I can see information about this student who has a specific learning disability. This student happens to be an 11th grader. So there's not a lot of time left to get things figured out and addressed. And on 10th grade assessments, this student was basically below basic in all academic areas, except for the area of one of the English language informational access to text. The student was approaching where they would like to be in that particular assessment. We can see that speech language information that was given talks a lot about school settings, manners, socially appropriate behavior, staying on task, not really focusing on how speech language deficits might be impacting future requirements for communication as an adult. Even the transition component of it really is limited in terms of what it says. Has experience working, mowing lawns, babysitting, doing chores at home, is interested in either attending school in Wyoming, Idaho, or Colorado, prefers to receive one-on-one help as an accommodation, hiking, walking, reading, or coloring during free time. None of those are things that help me a lot in understanding how I'm going to get the student who has deficient academic skills and wants to become a medical professional to fill in that gap of time. This student was given a traditional career assessment called ONET Online, which is an interest assessment. And from that, they found that this person would benefit from a career that would allow her to interact with others, investigate and solve problems, use her hand working with real world machinery, materials, and tools. Well, that doesn't necessarily fit with plans to become a doctor, somewhat, but not very closely. And also, the career clusters that assessments showed the student was interested in were manufacturing and product design, building and construction trades, and finally, health science and medical technology. So there are some related areas, but not necessarily a clear path to where she says she wants to go. If you're looking at the information that's given from the team, again, it has largely to do with her performance in the curriculum at the high school, talking about her compared to her general ed peers, which isn't particularly helpful in figuring out how to get to where we want to go. We understand that this student has some academic deficiencies. What we don't know is how to help her bridge those deficiencies, either through specialized instruction, training, or accommodations, to be able to continue to move forward in the direction that she stated she wants to go. Or it's quite possible that that is not a realistic career goal for that student, but that student doesn't realize that because this is not information that's being counseled to her in context to be able to understand what she would be up against to pursue that particular career. Oddly enough, probably the best example here of a present level statement that could impact her comes from her English resource teacher class, in which she's talking about her ability to write focused content information in formal writing practices, which, if she plans to go to college to become a doctor, is going to be a significant skill that she will have to develop, because we know that college oftentimes identifies the skills and growth of an individual through their written papers. But instead, this is what happens when that information is in separate silos and it's not brought together in a focused manner. The student's post-desired outcomes are stated as: student plans to go to college to study medicine, student plans to work as a nurse or a doctor. Per the student interview and assessment, the student will attend college to study medicine. Per the student interview and assessment, the student will work as a doctor or a nurse. And then per the student interview and assessment, the student has the skills to live on their own. Unfortunately, the transition assessment that was gathered provided limited information. And so students oftentimes make decisions about their next steps that are unrealistic or unattainable because they have no context in which to understand their performance compared to where they say they want to go. Now, that's not to say that just because a student has a discrepancy between what they are demonstrating today and what they are required to do in the future can't be bridged. I believe that absolutely can, but it is kind of a balancing act between the two, having honest and realistic information to make your decisions from, and then setting a clear roadmap about what work will have to be done to get to where you want to go. When you have that incomplete assessment, what happens is students make immature decisions. Many students are told that they can do anything if they just want it badly enough. And honestly, that's not a true statement for any of us. I oftentimes, when I'm telling students about the difference between wanting and being able to do something, I give the example of myself. I'm a 60-year-old woman. I'm not skinny. I don't have, the model look to me. No matter how bad I want to, I am not going to be that skinny model showing the hottest trends in fashion this year. Even if I was willing to lose the weight, even if I was willing to do plastic surgery, even if I was willing to dye my hair, the bottom line is I could go through all of those activities and I still would not meet the qualifications for the job that I want to do. That is reality. So we can't do anything. The message instead should be we can do many things if we want and put our minds to it. Many students identify post-secondary goals based on limited information. So they might know what they like and they'll focus on those interests without having any context of the other pieces that go into the planning and the reality of that as an outcome. Many students perceive that they have the limited ability to impact their own future. That's that external locus of control that I was talking about a little while ago. And as a result of these things, many students demonstrate either avoidance or procrastination in working towards their stated post-school outcomes. They simply don't want to put in the effort because number one, they don't believe it can happen, or number two, they don't know what effort is needed. And it's not just the students that get impacted when we do poor transition assessment. It's also the school teams, because many school members, unfortunately, believe that those post-school outcomes that are stated are unrealistic. Instead, they believe their focus is to just get them to a diploma or just get them through to get their certificate. That's their job, and the rest of it is up to somebody else. That's actually not the case. It is our job to bring a balance between what that student understands and wants to put in the effort to do and where they are right now and what processes they would need to go through to get to where they want to be. So as a result, school teams may lower their expectations of students to avoid them finding out or risking failure. They try to protect kids from the reality of their disabling conditions impact or the fact that they don't think that they're capable of doing something, rather than having the student rise to the challenge and show them that they, in fact, can meet that post-school goal. And I'm going to give a personal example from my own career. I was introduced to a young lady who, coming out of high school, I was working in an 18 to 21-year-old program at the time, coming out of high school, had expressed interest in becoming a cosmetologist. Well, this young woman, while she definitely had an interest and had done a lot of informal things in cosmetology work, she loved to paint nails, she loved to make people's hairdos and curl people's hairs and do makeup and do different things like that. She had only ever had informal opportunities to practice those things. And while she had actually improved her skill level in those things, she really didn't bring with her many of the base skills that were necessary to be able to meet the cosmetology board certification and actually be able to become a licensed cosmetologist. So when she came to us and stated this goal, quite honestly, her school team was kind of skeptical that she could get there. This young person struggled with her communication skills. She struggled with her academic skills. She had lower than average cognitive ability. And there were just many things about her profile on paper that didn't make that job sound very realistic. But because of good transition assessment, we were able to identify where the barriers were and come up with a plan about how to address those barriers. And part of that involved some very serious counseling about what she was going to have to put herself through to actually achieve that outcome. It wasn't just enough to want it. She was going to have to work for it. And she was going to have to put forth a lot of effort. and a lot of studying and a lot of learning. And she was going to have to learn how to do some things in a different way to overcome some of her areas of barrier. Well, not knowing all of the requirements of cosmetology school, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to know exactly how to pursue a program for her. So I drew in a cosmetology school instructor into our team to get information about materials and expectations and tools that she could potentially use to overcome some of these barriers. We also gave her some experiential learning opportunities of visiting the beauty school, trying some things, testing out the waters with some of the different things. And we involved vocational rehabilitation because we knew that she was going to need some support to get through the process. Well, I'm happy to say that while this young individual put in a ton of work, as did her school team, to be honest, she has been a licensed cosmetologist for several years now. She has been recognized as being an outstanding cosmetologist by the business that she works for. And she is a thriving, successful, independent adult. She didn't get there because she dreamed that she could get there. She didn't get there because she believed she could do anything she wanted to. She got there because her team gave her the proper supports, the correct experiences, and the correct practice and educational opportunity to actually make that bridge happen. So it's super important to take those risks and give those students the dignity of risk as part of the learning process, because she definitely had moments where she fell down on the job and she wasn't putting in the effort she needed to put in. And when she was called on it and found out that she wasn't successful if she didn't do those things, she stepped up and proved to us that she did want it and she was capable of putting in the hard work to get there. So instead of offering just remediation, trying to get her reading skills improved or her math skills improved or to work on her writing skills, we focused what that instruction looked like. So she wasn't just reading anything, she was reading a cosmetology book. She was being introduced to the language that she was going to have to use as part of school in her speech time. She was working on writing bills of sales and calculating taxes and making change for customers that were going to be coming into her shop one day, receiving those services. And her writing focused on writing up appointment cards and scheduling things in calendars and putting information about customers' preferences for hair color or for permanent rod sizes or for various things that she was likely to be exposed to. She even practiced on making small talk because that's a vital skill for a cosmetologist to have. So when all of those things became her focused program of educational study, instead of just trying to remediate and repeating the processes that she had gone through over and over and over again in her high school career, she was able to bridge those gaps. She was able to find workarounds, and she was able to identify accommodations that really worked for her in those situations where she needed them to work. So instead of identifying the minimal required activities by law, we really committed to her outcome and to her goals as a team. We couldn't work harder than she was willing to work to get there, but when we saw the effort she was willing to put in, we made more effort as a school team to figure out how to help her get there. Finally, we don't, as a school team, want to place the responsibility of adult outcomes on the family or the agencies that the student is going to be involved with after their high school career is over. And yet oftentimes that's exactly what happens. We'll introduce the student or their family to vocational rehabilitation, but that's kind of where we see the end of our responsibility. And so what happens is that student gets to VR and does not have the tool set they need, or does not have the skills and experiences to help them gain greater awareness, or has not demonstrated the motivations to put in the work necessary. And VR ends up being the bad guy in the process. The family is upset and angry because they don't understand what happened. And unfortunately, the student oftentimes doesn't end up successful. So we don't want to see transition services that look like this. The school's responsibility is to complete high school requirements, and that's going to be what the student and case manager work on throughout the year. That's how they're going to get to attend college and study medicine. The family's responsibility is to visit the campus and see what that is. So while these are both things that are obviously going to be part of the process, they're not necessarily going to drive the changes that are needed to help this student get from being at the skill level and involvement in her education and academics that she's at to where she wants to be actually attending college and studying medicine. Or for career, after high school, the student will work in a medical field as a doctor or a nurse. Well, we're going to have her take a transition class, or perhaps we're going to do a related career goal area, like maybe learning how to get a driver's license or ride the bus. But we're not really going to help her delve into that particular goal. We're going to help her research what you have to do if you want to go to med school. So we're going to give her basically a lesson in college, and we're going to do that as a one and done activity. We're not really going to help her understand where she needs to put in the work to make that change. And then we're going to ask the family to meet with DVR and set some things up. So you take it from here. The school's going to be done once we get her through those high school requirements and to the diploma. That's just not an effective transition plan. So when you're talking about the post-school vision for education and training, the first question to ask is, what's the right path for you? That path could look like a student exiting school going into rehabilitation and training services to continue to work on independent skills, communication skills, social skills, pre-vocational skills, whatever. That might be the education and training path for some of our students, but that is not the desired path. We are an employment first state, which means we want all families to be able to choose career as the first choice. So in order for that to happen, we have to help prepare students to get beyond just going in and doing more of the same when they leave high school. For some of our students who don't receive a diploma, they may want to go into adult education or GED or high school equivalency testing. We want to make sure that we connect them with those services, that they know how to use them. We may even help them prepare for them before they actually go into active services. Some of our students might look at going into community or workforce training. Maybe they're going to take a forklift operator's course, or maybe they're going to take a CPR class, or maybe they're going to take a swimming survival class to be able to work as a lifeguard. Those are all options of things that we can help assist them in getting connected to, and even help them be successful taking. Maybe they want to go into an internship or an apprenticeship model. So we want them to understand both the requirements, but also go through the application process, look for the opportunities, find out the fits that are out there in the world that are going to give them those kinds of experiences. Perhaps some of our students are going to go into vocational or trade school, such as the girl that I gave the example of going into cosmetology school. Or perhaps someone wants to go in and become an ASC certified mechanic. We want to make sure that we can successfully connect them to the programs of study and understand what they're going to have to do to be successful there. Some of our students are going to want to go into the military, and we want them to understand if they meet the requirements and what that process looks like if they decide to take that pathway. And then for some of our students, they may look at a 2 or a 4-year college or university program. Something that many people don't know is you do not have to be a high school graduate to pursue college. You can go to college while you're in high school if you'd like to. So it's important for us to not limit where students can go with future education and training simply based on the performance that they've showed in high school. The same is true for their post-school vision for employment. Again, the question should be asked, what's the right path for your student? Is it that pre-vocational and independent skills training program? Is it supported or customized employment where perhaps that individual is going to need some level of support or a job carved situation to be able to become successfully employed. Perhaps it's on-the-job training. They're going to enter into a career field that doesn't require specific prior experience or education, where they can learn as they earn and participate in the workforce. Maybe they'll go into a workforce skills training program. So they'll go into a construction trades training and they'll learn about OSHA requirements and forklift operation, or a variety of different things that would be especially focused for the community in which they're living. They may want to go into a vocational training program. Maybe they're going to become a commercial pilot, or maybe they want to become an artist. There's a variety of different things that they could pursue. Maybe they want to be an HVAC specialist, or they could go into college training as we traditionally think of it for preparation for a specific employment area, such as a professional or advanced degree. Now, I mentioned pre-employment transition services, and one of the things that's important for you to know is that PREETS is actually something that can help all your students in school. This program is offered under vocational rehabilitation. It serves students ages 14 through 22 as long as they're still enrolled in school services. And it serves students who are presumed eligible. What that means is they either have an IEP or a 504 plan, or a history of disability, or they are suspected of having a disability that has not yet been diagnosed. Getting into PREETS services is actually quite easy, and that's been done intentionally because the legislation believes that if we, kind of like in kindergarten and preschool, provide early intervention services, then individuals are more likely to have positive outcomes and less likely to need lifelong supports and assistance from an agency such as VR. PREETS services are offered at no cost to registered students or their families. They may be offered through a partnership with the school or even a community agency provider, again, at no cost to those organizations. Services can be provided during the school day or after school hours, and that's an individually decided decision. And they may be offered in person, or in my case, I even do some virtual services for students throughout the state. It is very easy to register for pre-employment transition services. Simply contact your local vocational rehabilitation office or ask your school if they have a PREETS application on hand. Hopefully all of the schools across the state have been given those documents to be able to share with families. It's a simple application. It's a one-page document with signatures on the back, and then 2 additional releases of information giving permission for vocational rehabilitation to speak to school providers, as well as to pre-employment transition service trainers and other contracted providers that might be offering services. There are 5 areas of service that is offered under pre-employment transition services. One is self-advocacy. And again, I talked about how important it is for students to understand their disability, the impact it has on them, and what accommodations and legal protections they have to be able to maximize the opportunities available to them. It also covers workplace readiness training. And this area focuses on all of those soft skills that are required for jobs, as well as job getting skills. So things like applications and resumes and interviews and looking for a job, those sorts of things. It offers opportunities in job exploration and counseling. And that's where students actually begin to examine what they want in a job compared to what a job wants from an employee, and begin to look for that match of their interests, their preferences, their values, and their working conditions that they're looking for to have a satisfactory career choice. Work-based learning is taking the student out into the community, either virtually or in person, to begin to explore what's in the world of work firsthand. So it can involve things like job shadowing or informational interviewing that can be done in person or over a platform like Zoom. Or it can also involve things like attending career fairs and participating as a volunteer or as a service worker as part of a service agency organization. It can include also opportunities to do work experiences in their field of interest, as well as potential on-the-job training support in opportunities. Finally, there's opportunities for post-secondary education and learning. And this is where students can really explore what are the various paths that they may travel over to get to the job that they're interested in. There's multiple ways to get to different kinds of jobs, especially when there's different support systems that are part of that formula. And so we try to help students understand the different approaches, the different options. And once they've settled on a direction to take, then how to actually connect to that organization and become a participant in their services. So what PREETS really does is it offers assistance in figuring it all out. We provide assessments to identify preferences and increase self-awareness. We offer education on career-related information topics. We provide experiences for exploration of careers and post-secondary education opportunities. We offer experiences both in the school and in the community to increase students' understanding of what is expected in the world of work or from a post-secondary learning opportunity. And then we also provide that counseling or bringing it all together to help students reflect on their information and make good decisions to help them move forward in their planning. As was reported early on in this webinar, the other thing that PREETS can do is provide education and training opportunities to parents, such as I'm doing today, or to school teams to help them better understand the resources that are available or the tools and materials that exist in the community that can help enhance their school program activities, and even community agencies to help them understand how they can become part of that membership team or facilitate these same outcomes. So when you're talking about career planning specifically, some of the things that should happen is to explore the careers through the assessment process, looking at things like interest testing, career cluster preferences, working condition preferences, work values, and student interviews. These can be offered and customized to meet the needs of the students that are taking the assessments. So for students who have no communication or limited communication skills, it might be done as a parent interview or as an observational activity. For students who might have difficulty with reading, there might be pictorial versions of different assessments for them to choose from so that it limits that impact of disability on them. And for students that can approach in a more traditional way, there's a variety of checklists and inventories and online assessments and different sorts of activities that they can do to help identify and narrow down what is the best career choice for me to make. Also using experiential learning opportunities. So doing things like job shadows, taking field trips, attending career fairs, participating in very short-term job trials, or a little longer term work experience, or even a micro internship to test out several different kinds of jobs, participating in volunteer activities, or working with a mentor, doing observations, having an informational interview with someone working in the field of interest, participating in a practicum experience, or doing clinical hours as part of a training development program. Engaging in part-time or seasonal jobs to try different things and see where your interests lie while you can still make money. And then also looking at clubs or organizations that you can become connected to also increase your knowledge and professionalism within a particular career of choice. Lots of different things as were described before. So part-time work, job shadowing, joining an organization like 4-H or FFA, volunteering, doing service learning work, participating in a career fair. All of those are great ways of exposing students and increasing their level of understanding about what's going to be expected of them as an employee if they pursue that career interest. As far as school activities and family activities, you really want to focus on developing those soft skills. So these are things that can move from job to job to job, regardless of the career area that you're going to be choosing long term. It includes things like communication skills, working as part of a team, being able to follow directions, both written and verbally, initiating tasks on your own, demonstrating good attendance and punctuality, working on problem solving and decision making, meeting deadlines, focusing and improving on dress and grooming for different environments and different activities, enhancing computer skills or time management, developing systems of organization, accepting corrective feedback, having a positive attitude, being resilient, and remaining on task. These are all things that families and school can work on together to help students be better prepared for their career of choice. And when college is the choice, you want to offer, first of all, I guess you want to ask, why college? It's important to know what you want to get out of college because people go to college for different reasons. Some individuals just want the college experience. They want to move away from home and have greater independence. They're really not that interested in figuring out their educational goals right now. They just want the chance to take that next step and have that become an experience to expand them as an individual. Some individuals want to have exposure to new learning and to new people in the community. And that might come from things like community education or distance education classes, or even community exploration classes in areas of interest, such as art or jewelry making or travel. There's a lot of things that you can do that may be offered at the college environment that don't necessarily constitute traditional college. Or they might be wanting to go to develop a specific workplace skill for a trade or a job. Maybe I'm going to go and get my CNA certification, or maybe I'm going to go and become trained in CPR, or I'm going to attend a forklift class, or an OSHA safety class. Those are all things that could be required for a specific job that you want to do that may require less than formal college study. You may also want to work towards a specific certificate in a career field. So for example, maybe I want to go and get my HVAC endorsement, or maybe I want to be trained as an EMT, or maybe I want to get my CNA license. Those are some opportunities that happen in shorter term educational training and oftentimes can be completed in a year or less. Some students want to go to college because they're interested in a degree. So they want to get an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, whatever. And some students want to go to college to obtain educational and experiential learning that's going to allow them the opportunity to move forward into certain professional endorsements, such as taking a master's program or a PhD program. So when you're asking why college, you're really trying to hone in on what you're going to get out of that experience, because that's going to be important in identifying the right place and the right program of study. So traditionally, when we're looking at sources of assessment for whether or not students are making academic progress and things that we're typically seeing on IEPs, we're oftentimes learning about how many credits a student has earned towards a high school diploma or a certificate of completion. We may be learning about their reading, writing, or math skill levels and proficiency as compared to their peer group. And we may be finding out about the grades and progress that they've made in the general high school curriculum. While this is all helpful information for high school teachers, it isn't necessarily the only information you need to be able to plan going forward to go to college. Some assessment data that should be thought about when you're thinking about a student's plans to attend college not only includes academic achievement, but in learning styles and multiple intelligences and effective accommodations. Those are oftentimes things that school teams do look at. But they may not look at what are the students' emotional support needs, or what are their independent living skills like? How much self-awareness do they have? And do they know how to self-advocate? What are their executive functioning skills like? Do they have motivation and self-confidence? Can they demonstrate personal safety skills or computer use skills or communication skills as will be required in their future environment? What's their money management skills like? Do they know what to do with their free time? Do they know how to access the communities that they plan to be in? Do they have personal transportation skills? What are their interpersonal skills like? Can they avoid conflicts both in the classroom and in their residential settings? What are their personal health care needs? And why are they going to college? What are their reasons? So basically, we want to look at all those balls that are going to have to be shuffled as part of Adulting 101 and find out, where are we now? Because when a student moves on to college, they also move away from the support system that has been helping them manage all of those balls, or in some cases, managing those balls for them. It's important to know where they are to be able to help them bridge where they are now and where they want to be 1 year out of high school. Also, does your student clearly understand what's coming? Do they realize that there's going to be changes in their support system, that there's going to be changes to the responsibilities that they're going to be held accountable to, and that the roles are going to be changing for the people that they're used to taking care of things in their life? They also have to find out about the changes in the law that offer them the protection in those different environments that they can fall back on when needed. It's important to understand the difference between high school and college. So in a global sense, students are held responsible for their own learning when they go to college. In high school, that's not the case. Support systems are limited and they must be accessed by the student if they're needed. No one's going to come finding them to offer them supports and identifying what supports are needed. Students must hold themselves accountable for their success, not their parents, guardians, or teachers. So no longer can they rely on their parent or guardian to pick up the slack if they're not getting it themselves, or a second chance or a third chance to do it when it was their job to do it to begin with. So here's some of the differences that it's important for you and your students to understand will be changing between high school and college. Excuse me. So high school is a learning environment where teachers are responsible for ensuring that students learn the information that's taught. But in college, it's a teaching environment where students are responsible for learning what the professors present. In high school, students are told what to do, they're monitored, and they're given frequent feedback on progress. But in college, students are expected to take responsibility for their learning again, track their own progress, and seek help when it's needed. In high school, class attendance is mandatory, but in college, class attendance varies by professor. Some will consider that as part of the grade and some will not. In high school, classes typically have 25 to 30 students, but in college, you might have a class that goes from a classroom of 5 students up to 250 or more if you go to a university setting. In high school, teachers remind students of the upcoming tests and work deadlines, but in college, professors expect students to read and follow the course syllabus on their own. In high school, teachers approach students if it appears that they're having difficulty with the course. In college, the students will be required to initiate that help if it's needed on their own. In high school, study time is expected outside of class, sometimes 1 to 3 hours per week. But in college, the professors often require that students spend 2 to 3 hours of studying outside of class for every 1 hour that they spend in the classroom setting. In high school, students are expected to read and study small segments of materials that are then going to be reviewed in class. But in college, professors may require extensive amounts of reading that may never even be discussed in class, but are expected to be learned and applied. High school grades are given for most, if not all, assigned work. In college, you might get the assignments and they may never see them again, or they may not be graded. In high school, you have homework, quizzes, and extra credit, which are usually part of your total grade in addition to test scores. But in college, your grades are going to be based on only a few tests or papers that are assigned, and extra credit is usually not an option. In high school, teachers often consider students' effort when they determine course grades, while in college, professors expect and appreciate effort, but they're not going to use it to determine your grade. In high school, students can graduate and pass courses as long as they get a D. In high school programs, especially programs that have focused programs of study, you typically can't even take classes unless you carry a 2.0 or a C grade point average. In high school, courses are generally determined based on a specified course of study, so kids know what they have to take, and that's kind of planned out for them with limited number of electives. But in college, the courses are based on your program of study, so you have to work closely with your advisor to make sure that the required courses are taken and that they're taken in the sequence required. High school's free, but college is very expensive. And so students have to learn about financial assistance and applying for things like grants and scholarships or taking out loans responsibly to pay for their college programming. In high school, once the students are enrolled, the school basically takes care of ensuring that the kids are going to get the education that is provided and needed. But in college, you're going to have to apply, go through admissions, meet with an advisor, go through registration and orientation, and take placement class to find out if you're even eligible to take the courses required for your area of study. In high school, accommodations are provided by your teachers or your case managers, and they ensure that students are both given access to accommodations and are using them to best meet their needs. But in college, in order to even get the accommodation, you have to typically go through a disability services program or speak directly to your professor. And then it's up to the professor to determine whether or not that's a reasonable accommodation based on guidance from their disability services program. And then it's up to the student to access those accommodations and make sure that they're in place as needed. Is your student ready to be an independent learner? Well, there's different assessments that can be given. This one, A Guide to Assessing College Readiness, looks at several different components of skills that students are going to need to be successful in a college environment. And then it gives some specific suggestions of ways that you can improve your skills if you're not meeting the mark. Are they ready for their independence? This assessment looks at the autonomy levels of students across a variety of skills that they're likely to encounter when they move away from home, whether they do it as they go to college or whether they choose to pursue a career in another city or town. But it's really looking at how many of these things are currently supported by the family structure in some capacity, and are your students ready to take them on their own? It looks at a variety of skills relative to maintaining a household, taking care of themselves, accessing their community, and being successful as a citizen and in an educational process. One of the things that I want you to realize is that transition really is a family experience. It's not just the student who's going to be going through this big change. The rules are going to change for parents too. And you need to understand how your role needs are going to change from parent guardian to adult support. So you need to educate yourself on the changes in the law. What are the changes in funding and services available? What are the limitations of the agencies or post-secondary providers you plan to work with? So almost all adult agencies require eligibility determination and then oftentimes have waiting lists for funding and or the delivery of services. They don't happen simply because they're needed or even because there's a documentation supporting that kind of a service. And then what do you do if you're unhappy with services? How do you advocate or support your child in advocating for better services and not be exploited by individuals who might say they're offering things, but in fact do not do so? So a few final thoughts as we're ready to close. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to begin the process early, regardless of whether you see your child going into college or career futures. Create opportunities to practice autonomy and independent performance. Identify those experiences and activities that should occur to help your student gain self-awareness and an understanding of the demands of those future settings that they hope to go to. Please avoid the tendency to protect your child or do things like focus only on school right now. Recognize that these approaches may only delay stressors for a time when there's less support and the stakes are much higher. Recognize that your role changes. You're going to have limited opportunities to get or offer information in those post-secondary settings. Post-secondary institutions and employers are going to expect your child to be held accountable for their performance and won't necessarily contact you if there's concerns. And while you may have influence over your child, you may no longer have decision-making power or legal rights to know about things. And so your ability to be an active supporter is going to change. Insist that agencies collaborate with each other. Expect the agency representatives to be invited to your IEP meetings by the school. That is their responsibility. And you may make requests for particular agencies to participate in the process. Not only expect them to be invited, but expect those agency representatives to attend those IEPs or to contact you if they're unable to do so. And I have many times participated in a plan of care meeting as a teacher, as well as invited waiver case managers to the IEP meeting because they were going to become an integral part of that future process and planning. We needed to work collaboratively to make things happen. We can't operate in separate silos, and in some cases, perhaps even teaching things in completely different ways. You have the right to expect that all supporters of your student are going to work together to achieve the post-school outcomes. And it's important to identify the roles for providing services. Who's going to be responsible for finding those stated activities? Also remember to reach out for support for yourself. Ask to be invited to training opportunities about adult services, or ask for referrals for systems of supports that you can fall back on. Ask for clarification when you don't understand or you're confused by the information that you're given. And find out what parent support and advocacy groups are available for you to join. Finally, I want to close by letting you know that if there's anything I can do to help, I would gladly work with anyone to try to find resources, or in some cases, perhaps even provide services for your child's needs. You can reach me at workstudygal@bresnan.net or at my cell phone provided. My company name is Cheryl Junge, LLC. And again, I'm a pre-employment transition services trainer under vocational rehabilitation. So I can work in person with some students as well as virtually with students across the state. If I can help, please let me know. Thank you for your time today. I hope you gained some valuable experience from this and have a better sense of how you can help your child succeed in their future post-school outcomes. Hope to see you soon.